Let's talk about something completely uncontroversial, which would be the moon landings. Now, before I get into that, I'll just quickly mention we need people who can push buttons. So if you are a button pushing person and know your way around sort of editing tools and cameras and all that kind of stuff, have a look at our website where we've got a career opportunity open. We've got a position available in both London and Swindon. So check that out. Now, on the matter of conspiracies, the US does have quite a strong record when it comes to conspiracies. Now, I'll actually start with ones that we can prove rather than ones that we can't. So just to whiz through a couple, during Prohibition, the US Department of the Treasury poisoned alcohol. And the New York's chief medical examiner personally identified over 1,000 people that had been poisoned by the alcohol. The Tuskegee syphilis experiment. For 40 years, the government claimed to be treating black men for their syphilis, but was actually just watching them and giving them fake medicine just to see what would happen.
Oh, really? I've not heard of that one.
You've not heard of the Tuskegee? Oh, that was a big one. More than 100 million Americans received a polio vaccine contaminated. Again, presumably to see what happened. The Gulf of Tonkin incident. For years, this was a sort of an attack that led to the US getting involved in Vietnam, and for years that was a officially denied conspiracy theory. Recently, declassified documents out in 2005 confirmed that actually, it never happened. So it was a genuine conspiracy. Oh, this one is mad. Operation Northwards. Yeah, so the Joint Chiefs of Staff signed off on a plan to commit terrorist acts in America, pin them on Cuba so that they could invade them.
In the early Castro years.
Yeah. And JFK said, yeah, you're not doing that. But the bloody Joint Chiefs of Staff signed off on that plan, but they couldn't get it past JFK, presumably because George Bush wasn't in the White House at the time. So, yeah, and again, declassified documents show that. The government using LSD on unwitting citizens to see what happened. MK Ultra, the MK standing for mind control. So that's another one. The Iran Contra scandal. They were selling weapons to Iran to channel money to Nicaraguan militants. Again, denied. If you said anything about that, you were a conspiracy theorist, and then declassified documents have now come out and said, yeah, we did that one. A public relations firm organised a 15-year-old Kuwaiti girl to make up stories about Iraqi troops dumping babies on the floor in their first invasion, and it then turned out that this was set up by a PR firm. Right, now, all of those that I mentioned, you don't need to worry about them being conspiracy theories. All of those have been admitted to. All of them, we have declassified documents that demonstrate all of those, right?
Well, I know a bit about the last one. So she actually testified they took babies out of incubators and then smashed them on the floor.
Yeah.
And then it turns out that obviously she was, a rich child of a Kuwaiti family, so wasn't in Kuwait during any of the invasion, was studying in the United States.
Yeah, it was all
had not been to Kuwait for like 3 years.
Yeah.
Like, it was transparently stupid that anyone even believed that.
Yeah. So, I mean, those are just ones that we can say without question because we have the declassified documents that prove it and it's been admitted. There are other ones that haven't been admitted. So, JFK, I know that you've written a lot on that, Bo. I mean, as far as I'm concerned, the bloody CIA took him out. I know that's your view, isn't it? What's his name? RFK, who's running at the moment. I mean, he's just up front that he thinks the CIA killed his dad and his uncle. Nixon, that's one we talked about the CIA's involvement in the downfall of Nixon. I know you have more qualms over that one, but there's issues to be raised there about how this naval intelligence officer suddenly became a journalist and immediately got the top story in the world. And it was all collaborated by former intelligence agents, so that's interesting. USS Liberty. Yeah, I won't talk about that one too much because I don't want my car to blow up, but people will know what I'm talking about on that one. And of course, 9/11. Issues to be raised on that one.
What about WMD?
Oh yeah, that one. Yeah, that one as well. Yeah, there's lots of them. So my point is that the US deep state has a long history of doing this shit. On multiple occasions, they've actually come clean and said, "Yeah, we did that." And some of them, like the JFK, the Nixon, and the US Liberty, and the 9/11, I mean, are just wide open. to be proved a point. My favourite book on the 9/11 stuff is from a former pilot, Philip Marshall, and he basically talked through in this book just how, I mean, the main thing was the utter improbability of the plane going into the Pentagon, and he walked through the steps that a pilot would do it, and even other pilots, when they read this, like, yeah, actually there's a handful of pilots in the world who could have pulled that off, let alone somebody who trained in a Cessna for like 6 hours. So anyway, so he put that book out, and funny thing is, he had 2 kids and his wife, and the kids and the wife were going to go to visit her mother for the weekend, and at the last minute, the kids ended up staying home with him, and that night, people burst into the house, a home invasion, and shot them all. Didn't steal anything. They just all got shot. So that's a bit unfortunate. So he won't be writing a sequel to that book, but it was very persuasive on a lot of people. So anyway, my point is that lots of this stuff has gone on for a long time, and I knew about lots of it, but it didn't really click with me. It didn't really click with me until COVID and the 2020 election, and it was like, okay, yeah, they're not. This is just not something that's in the history. This is something that has happened throughout and still happens right up until this day. Like these big conspiracies. Now, I always separately walled off from that the moon landings, right? Because I just thought, yeah, all of these other things are definitely fake, but that one, that's a good story. I like that one. That's definitely true. So I was always 100% on, and I always put people who raise any questions about the moon landings on the same level as people who talk about flat Earth. I just thought it was complete nonsense. But after the 2020 election and the COVID stuff, I just thought maybe I'd look a little bit deeper. And so my faith level went down from like 100% to like 99%. Right. And I kind of felt a bit dirty being at 99%. I was like, yeah, only weird people raise any questions about this. So I want to go from 99% back up to 100%. So I started looking for good evidence to set my mind at ease. And basically, the more evidence I looked for, the lower and lower my certainty went until I got to where I am today, which is like, I just don't know. I'm like 50-50. Maybe it did happen. Maybe it doesn't. But I don't know. But there were genuine questions out there. Yeah.
Well, I would say that obviously there are lots and lots of examples of when the American deep state have perpetuated massive conspiracies.
Massive ones.
So I'll give you that, right?
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily mean that the moon landings are.
No.
That doesn't follow for me. So I'd say I'm one of those people that do believe men landed on the moon.
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll have a bit of a back and forth about it.
Yeah.
But I think it's okay to be skeptical though. Because where I'm like a historian, an armchair amateur historian, fan of history, but particularly ancient history, that's really my forte, is what you're sort of like a detective in a way, dealing with a small amount of evidence, especially in ancient history. You've sometimes only got tiny fragments of evidence, and you have to try and work out what is more or less likely to have been true from the evidence. And it's okay to be skeptical. So, for example, neither of us were involved in the Apollo program.
That's true.
Right.
Yep.
Neither of us are sort of geologists.
Yeah.
So what we can only really say is what is more or less likely to be true.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
I can't say for 100% it happened, and you can't say for 100% it didn't happen.
Well, that's not my position anyway.
Right,
I'm 50-50.
okay, sure.
Yeah.
But so the point is you have to end up coming down unless you actually flew on one of those Apollo missions and set foot on the moon yourself.
Not many people did.
Right. Yeah. You can only say what is more or less like true. For me, the preponderance of evidence is that we did. But you go ahead before I set out my stall. Where I think there is lots of evidence.
Let's talk about some of that, because and the other thing I just note before I get into this, I just find it really interesting the reaction to raising any doubts about this stuff, because people get very angry very quickly, and they almost immediately go to, if you don't believe this, you must be stupid.
The other thing is true though. If I've had it because I've written articles about space things and I've talked about space things from time to time. You get people in the comments going, "Oh my God, I can't believe you believe in that there's a space station. I can't believe you believe we went to the moon. Of course we didn't.
Yeah.
It's one of those things like.
But this issue in particular makes people really angry for some reason. I don't know why. And that was like the start of the problem for me, because when I dipped to like 99% certain and I went looking for videos to prove it to me, like I watched all these videos and they were basically just like half-hour, 45-minute videos of people calling you stupid if you don't believe it. And I was watching them thinking, okay, any second now he's going to give me the clincher argument. And it's just, there were just like hundreds of videos just saying, if you don't believe it, you're stupid. It's like, well, yeah, but that doesn't work on me.
So beyond the fact that America is guilty of all sorts of, the American government deep state, have been guilty of all sorts of cover-ups and things.
Yeah.
Why don't you think men landed on the moon?
Well, like I said, I'm 50-50. I don't know.
Right.
My position is not that they didn't. It's just that there's sort of interesting questions. So obviously the first thing you go to is like, oh, well, there's loads of footage, isn't there? Interesting thing about that. Now, obviously, you know, if it's on TV, for boomers, that is instantly enough. Like, that's all the evidence you need. If it's on TV, it's true, right? Why was the footage third hand, though? Because you know the footage that was never actually been given out. The way it was done is NASA put the footage up on a projection screen, and then they put a camera on that projection screen, and then that was fed to a monitor, and then all the networks had to basically film from that monitor. So it was like a third-hand signal. So that's part of the reason why the footage quality is so low. It's like, why did they do that? Why have they never handed out the originals? And the interesting thing is the director Ron Howard. He actually went to NASA a few decades ago and said, I want to do a special on this and put it all on the cinemas. I want to edit it all nicely. Give me all the raw footage.
He's the director of Apollo 13, isn't he, Ron Howard?
Yeah. And so he wanted to use loads of the original footage. And he went to NASA and said, can I have the original footage? And they said, no, we destroyed it.
All right. Are you just talking about Neil Armstrong of Apollo 11?
No, the moon landings in general. I mean, mainly. But
no,
I mean,
so that's not true. So there's loads of footage, particularly of Apollo 14, 15, 16 and 17. There's hours and hours and hours and hours of footage.
So there is hours and hours of it, but the original footage was never given out. It was always done through that process of being shown on a monitor.
Okay. I don't know
which
that
the
one way or
networks
another.
then had to have a third-hand signal. It's like, why did they do that rather than just providing the original footage, and why did they destroy it? I don't get that. The other thing that I find really curious about the footage is...
Because I've just seen lots and lots of footage from particularly Apollo 15, 16 and 17, where it doesn't look... It's not that ridiculously grainy Apollo 11 style footage. It's not that. It is pretty clear stuff. And again, hours and hours of them driving around in the rovers and all sorts of stuff. Yeah,
I mean, especially on the later ones, there is more footage available.
So one thing I'll say real quick before you go on is I've got questions about Apollo 9... 10 and 11. Apollo 9 and 10 went to the moon and back but didn't actually land. And Apollo 11, obviously the famous moon landing, its first one. I've got all sorts of questions about images and footage. Okay. But Apollo 14, 15, 16, 17, there seems to be no doubt.
You find that a lot more convincing, the later footage?
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I mean, I don't know the answers to all of this. The other thing I don't know an answer to is obviously AI fake detection has had a hell of a lot of investment lately because everyone's worried about misinformation and stuff like that. So Google have been spending billions, and other people have been spending billions on software that detects fakes. The interesting thing is when you run the moon landage footage through these fake detections and they've got like a perfect accuracy record, they say it's fake.
Oh, really? I've not seen it.
And they don't just, it's not just like a big fake message comes up on the screen. They give you like almost 200 detailed reasons as to why it's fake. And they go into really granular things that humans would never spot. Things like, the light intensity and color patterns and distribution, stuff like that it tells you that it's from an electric light, not the sun, and a whole bunch of stuff. And you can put in and it's not just because it's filmed on the moon, because you can put in other footage from unmanned vehicles that have gone there, like the NASA's lunar rovers and Martian rovers and stuff like that, and it says, yeah, that's true. But when you put in the landing ones where humans went there, it says it's fake, and it gives you loads and loads of complex reasons as to why it's fake. And I don't know why that. And maybe there's an innocent explanation for all of these things. Why they destroyed the footage, why they put it up on a monitor and did it third hand and didn't hand out the originals, and why the AI says. I just don't know what the reasons are. So I think those are questions. The other thing
I've not heard anything about that. That's entirely new to me. This AI.
Yeah, the AI thing is definitely new. That's fairly recent. The other thing that people always say is, "Oh, you're stupid if you don't believe it," because there's reflectors on the moon that you can ping and stuff like that. And I thought, okay, I've got it. I've got my solid evidence as to why it's definitely true. So I looked into that, and it then turns out that actually the Chinese, the Indians, and the Russians all have reflectors on the moon.
Yeah,
they just
the Chinese don't.
Yeah, they just landed them there. So the reflectors tells you that you got a vessel there. It doesn't tell you that you landed humans, which is interesting. So there's that one.
Well, so as I understand it, there's been all sorts of reflectors put on the moon. Right now, 6 still operate. 3,
something like that.
3 American ones, 2 Russians, and a Chinese. An Indian one.
Yeah.
And one of the or 2 of the 3 American ones, I believe, were Apollo era ones. I think the Apollo 11 one. So what you're saying, that's not.
Well, I'm just saying that if other countries have reflectors up there and they do not make the claim that they landed humans, that makes me think, oh well, did the first ones land humans as well? Because the reflectors clearly don't tell you that they landed humans. It only tells you that they landed something.
I suppose, but I think it's quite well documented. I think it was Apollo 14 or Apollo 12, but certainly Apollo 11, they put a reflector down. And again, it's documented the footage of them putting it down and placing it and stuff.
Yeah.
So,
but I mean, they could have landed that previously, and
yeah, I mean, it could, I suppose. But again, it gets to the preponderance of what's more likely.
Yes,
it becomes it becomes more.
Yeah. No, my point more is that therefore the reflector argument is not conclusive proof, because clearly, if other nations can land reflectors without landing people, then presumably the Americans have that ability as well. So I didn't find that. The other thing I thought too. Okay, rocks.
Yeah.
Lunar rocks. Yeah, that has to be solid, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Couple of interesting stories on that. One, Neil Armstrong personally presented a lump of lunar rock to the, I think it was the Dutch Prime Minister.
I've heard this.
And more recently, they got curious and they put it under a microscope, and it turned out it was petrified wood. So that's just one example. Maybe it's only the Dutch Prime Minister, so maybe he doesn't warrant a proper bit of rock. The other thing that I found really interesting is, did you know that Eva, was it Braun, the Nazi scientist they had,
Werner von Braun?
Werner von Braun, yeah. So apparently back then in the 60s, you just had a Nazi on hand for whatever reason, but you had a Nazi in
the greatest rocket expert in the world.
Yes. Did you know that he took a holiday 6 weeks before the 1969 landings? 6 weeks before the landings, he decided to take a holiday. Do you know where he went?
No.
Antarctica.
Right.
For his holiday.
Okay.
Which just so happens to be the best location on Earth to collect lunar meteorites. That's interesting. I don't know why he did that. I mean, presumably the beaches are fantastic.
So the thing about the rocks is that they brought back something in the order of 800 pounds of rocks.
Yeah.
Like Apollo 17 alone brought back 240, 250 pounds of rocks. There's loads of moon rocks. If they gave the Dutch Prime Minister a dodgy one, I can't explain that. I don't know why that is. Yeah. But I think it's fair to say, and again, I'm not like a geologist or a chemist or anything, but I think it's fair to say that putting all these rocks by all sorts of different places, not just NASA, saying we've tested it, we've done analysis on it, and just believe us, they're definitely extraterrestrial rocks. I think it is the case that it's documented that other countries and other people have done analysis on these rocks, and they're shown to not be terrestrial.
I'm sure they're real lunar rocks, but you do every so often get lunar rocks landing on Earth, and apparently Antarctica is the place to get them.
But like 800 pounds of them.
I have no idea how many accumulate there. The reason you go to Antarctica apparently is because it's very white and it hardly ever snows.
See them.
So it stands out like a mile. So they can accumulate there over decades, and then you can just go along and scoop up, I don't know, 800 pounds worth or whatever. However,
doesn't really make sense to me. There's a difference between sort of meteorites and actual lunar regolith.
Yeah, and maybe these tests.
I don't think lunar regolith just falls on Antarctica regularly.
I don't know. So maybe that would be the clincher argument as to why it definitely happened. I don't know, but I just think it's an interesting choice for a holiday 6 weeks before the landing. I don't know why that is, but yeah, maybe maybe that is in itself the solid argument that I'm looking for. Don't know. The other thing is, people always say, is how could you possibly keep it quiet? Because it's a big project. Surely somebody would have stuck their hand up and said, this is a bit suspect. And again, I thought that's a good argument. But I've worked on big projects for big companies. You normally only have a small handful of people who are aware of the big picture. Normally everybody just does their silo thing. There's a team that works on a particular bit, right? And I would imagine that if there was a bit of tomfoolery going on here, they wouldn't have held an all-hands meeting and said, look, guys, this is what's going on. There would have been people who were diligently working on their bit of the project, and only a small number of people would have actually seen it in totality, would have seen it all pulled together.
If the whole thing is a hoax, though, it will be in the interests of the Russians, if nobody else, to expose it as such.
Oh, I'm coming to that one. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm coming to that one. And just while we're talking about people blowing the whistle on this, of course, there have been people who have blown the whistle on this, but they've been sort of sidelined or not listened to. I mean, one example is Eugene Akers, who was head of security at Cannon Air Force Base. And he said that that's where it was filmed. He gave a deathbed confession saying that this is where it was filmed. So there have been people who have come out, but they just don't get any sort of coverage. So that's interesting. The other thing that people say is, you can see the landing site. I've actually had somebody on Twitter get really angry at me when I mentioned this before, and he said, you could just put a telescope in your garden, you can look at the landing site. Now, that definitely isn't true because, this is a simple question of physics. To get a resolution on a 2-meter wide object from Earth, you can run the calculations as to how big the telescope needs to be. It's far, far bigger than any telescope that humans have ever made. However, you do have lunar orbiters that can look down. So there's one by NASA that has shown pictures.
The
of
LRO,
the
yeah.
Yeah.
The Lunar Reconnaissance Orbiter, yeah.
So that's a good piece of evidence. Although, if it was NASA who were doing something a bit iffy, of course, they would be motivated to put out some dodgy footage or land something after the fact and then claim, look, this is what we've seen.
Well, the LRO is interesting. That was going to be my clincher. That was going to be my slam dunk.
Right, okay.
Is the LRO. So that went up in 2009 and it's still up there now. And it's mapped the whole of the lunar surface.
Right.
And it goes as low as about 30 or even some occasionally lower, 20 kilometres from the surface.
Yeah.
And it's pictured all the Apollo landing sites.
Yes.
And you can see the descent stage. You can see the 2 or even 3 rovers that are left there.
Yeah.
You can see the various experiments they did. You can see the tracks of the rovers.
Yeah.
You can see even the shadow of the flags.
You can't see it that well, but yeah, I've seen it.
You can see it quite well.
Yeah. So that I would say is fairly strong evidence, which kind of tilts me back. So this is why I'm at 50-50.
It's possible all of that is a hoax and a fake.
Yeah. So
but it's extremely unlikely to be.
Yeah.
Extremely unlikely that the LRO and everyone at the Goddard Space Center, everyone, all the science team of the LRO, they're all in on it. It's not likely.
Would they have to be? Because again, my position on all of this is my level of certainty that you can get a rocket there is very high, and that you can land objects is very high.
Yeah.
It's the taking the humans there, surviving that, and all the rest of the stuff that goes with it that I have some doubt on. But
But then you're saying that after the fact, they landed sort of fake Apollo sites so that the LRO could then photograph
all the images. I don't know.
That's unlikely.
Yeah, I'm not. So that is why with all of this stuff I'm 50-50 because that is like okay, it could go either way.
Well, but that's what I'm saying. It almost certainly couldn't go either way.
That does seem to be the strongest bit of evidence that it is that way, even though it is NASA presenting this. I'll tell you what, if you want a stronger piece of argument than even that, is like just in the last few weeks, another lunar orbiter, I can't remember if it's like the Chinese or the Indians, they also picked up one of these sites. So now they would have to be in on it as well, or these things would have had to be landed. So that I kind of feel is probably the strongest argument for that it did happen.
So at the beginning of the segment, I talked about neither of us can say 100%.
Yeah.
So then you are left with what the preponderance of evidence suggests, and then how
this for me is the first bit that is like good.
So you could say all the footage is fake, all the moon rocks are fake. all the images from the LRO are fake. You could, like, that's possible.
Yeah.
But now, added them all together, you're left with the conclusion, you should be left with the conclusion, that though that's possible, and the Russians and the Indians and the Chinese and the European Space Agency, they're all in on it. Okay, that's possible. It's extremely unlikely that that is the case, though.
Perhaps.
In my view, to my mind.
Yeah. Yeah, so I'm sort of still manning the argument first, but yeah, those are all fairly good things. Although, there are ways around it, and like, why was the footage destroyed? Why was it always given third hand? Why do AI tools say that it was faked? Why did he this von Braun character go to Antarctic just before to harvest rocks or whatever it is? Why do we have whistleblowers? But yeah, I will give you the LRO stuff. It feels like quite good. The other arguments I came across is that and this is Neil deGrasse Tyson's point, is that there's loads of documentation and it would be harder to fake the documents than to land on the moon. That one doesn't resonate with me, to be honest.
I see his point, but it's not a slam dunk argument. Is
well, that is his argument. So I thought I'd throw it in there because lots of people follow Neil.
But again, it's an okay argument. It makes sense. It makes some sense. You throw it on the pile of, if you're balancing things.
Yes.
Again, like if it's a court case.
Yeah.
No one actually saw the crime.
Yeah.
Or if it's a bit of history and you've only got fragments of evidence, one way or another, you're going to balance it up. All the things that sort of suggest it is fake and all the things that suggest it isn't.
Yes.
It's now heavily weighted.
Let me quickly come so this covers up the other points as well. So, the other argument people make is that if it was fake, the Russians would have called it. And the example there is that you could track the rocket like heading in that direction. And again, this is a sort of physics point, that it would take substantially more fuel for a rocket to go there and back than it would be to keep a rocket in the same point in the orbit, because it was always in between the Earth and the Moon, right? And it would have taken substantially more fuel to fight the orbit on that way. But again, that proves that a rocket went, not necessarily that there's anyone on it and a landing took place. But that is a good argument, and that might also be why it wasn't called out at the time, because presumably it was sophisticated enough to fool the Russians for at least a time. Now, there could be other considerations as to why they don't say it now. I mean, as I pointed out to you earlier, the Russian space agency and Chinese space agencies today, they just tell their people, it didn't happen, but don't mention it to the Americans because they get upset. So, so that is another one.
One last point on the rocks, just to say that in 1976, the Russians sent an unmanned probe to the moon, picked up some space rocks and fired it back to Earth. So the Ruskies have got some rocks as well.
Okay.
And I think, again, you're able to show that the NASA rocks marry up with the chemistry or the analysis of the Russian rocks.
So this is my thing again. I have a much higher level of certainty about vehicles traveling there, but unmanned ones, right? And then you got the sort of evidence going the other way. So there's all the light and the shadows stuff, which I don't really pay an awful lot of attention to, but is a good point. Why did the shadows go in different directions and all kind of stuff like that? Which never worried about that.
I think nearly all of that stuff gets debunked.
Yeah, well, not well, but I don't know.
You get into the weeds of stuff.
Then there's the whole the footage where an arm appears outside of the capsule. So. And again, you could try and stillman that one. So there was
on Apollo 11.
Yeah, so there was footage that got accidentally passed out of basically an arm appearing outside of the capsule, where they had been filming for like over an hour as if they were halfway to the moon. So it's clearly fake, but you could make the argument, well, that was just a training session because they practiced for everything, including what messages to send back to Earth when it got there. So maybe there's an innocent.
And also there's Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, 17 as well.
Yeah.
It's not just Apollo 11.
Yep,
right?
Yep, that's fair. That's fair. There's a whole load of technical arguments I don't know how to assess, which is like, the moon during the day is substantially hotter than the Sahara, and at night it's substantially colder than the Arctic. And they were apparently running heating and air conditioning in that thing with about 6 car batteries, the equivalent of 6 car batteries for 3 days. I
don't know the science on all of that.
Yeah,
properly,
which I mean, it does sound like, well, yeah, what's going on there? But I don't know how to assess that one. There's the Van Allen radiation belt, which we recently discovered, scientists pointed out, is much stronger than they thought it was in the 60s. And the amount of shielding that was supposed to be on it is just clearly insubstantial.
Well, I've heard other people say that that sort of radiation is just that's the lie, that there's some sort of crazy radiation that you can't pass out of low Earth orbit because you'll just be fried by radiation. I've heard other people say that's the nonsense bit.
Oh, no, so, the radiation belt is definitely a thing.
Yeah, the Van Allen belt is a thing, but whether it fries you if you ever pass out of low Earth orbit.
Well, we now know the levels of that radiation. The radiation is enough to kill you. So
is it though?
Well, yeah.
But I was talking about the preponderance of evidence. What's more or less likely?
Yes.
You don't know that. I don't know it. I'm not claiming I do know for sure.
So that's why I'm mentioning it for completeness' sake. But it's difficult to know. But this was basically a quasi-military project at the height of the Cold War, when the US state was under significant pressure because of the Vietnam War. It needed a win. The Soviets had beat it on every other major milestone in the space race at this point. Now, Kennedy got up in, was it 61, and said, we're going to go to the moon by the end of the decade. Is it possible, and this is the thing that makes me wonder, is it possible they set out with all the best intentions, they got halfway through, and then they thought, oh, bugger, this is actually a hell of a lot harder than we thought it was, but they were too committed at that point. So they carried on. That is a possible. So all those silos of work we talk about, they were genuine work, but it just couldn't come together. So I don't know about that. The only thing I would note is this is the only NASA project in history to be completed on time.
Well, I'm fascinated by the whole thing. The earlier Mercury and Gemini projects before Apollo. Okay, I got some questions about Apollo 9, 10, and even about 11. But for me, the later ones, at least 14, 15, 16, 17. It seems to me
let me wrap this off with a story of four people that I want to quickly talk about. The first one is these guys, the original team, and that's Gus Grissom on the centre right there. So, and you got to remember that there was no Netflix, no internet. This story was like total fixation. These guys were national heroes. So this was the original team. So that Gus Grissom chap, in about 1967, he started to have serious doubts about what was going on. And he pulled together a press conference and said, look, this project is not going to work. We are a minimum 10 years away from this working. And he was getting increasingly vocal that this thing that he was supposed to go up in wasn't going to work. In fact, famously hung a lemon on it. He said, this thing is a lemon. It's not going to work, which is kind of really interesting. So he held that press conference. And then the next day, the CIA was all over the launcher, the test launcher thing that they had, and he wasn't allowed to go near it. The team wasn't allowed to go near it. Anyway, the next day, they go back in for a test. And for whatever reason, they decide that today, the thing they want to test is high pressure, pure oxygen. So they bolt the door down, and for some reason, an oily rag is left under his seat. And for some reason, there's a
Is
power.
this Apollo 1?
Yeah.
Apollo 1.
And for some reason, there's a weird power drop, as if something gets turned on, and this happens. Let's hear what happened next to him after his press conference of him saying that this is not going to work.
This is a CBS News special report.
This is Mike Wallace at the CBS Newsroom in New York. America's first 3 Apollo astronauts were trapped and killed by a flash fire that swept their moonship early tonight during a launch pad test at Cape Kennedy in Florida. Virgil Gus Grissom, 40 years old, one of the original Mercury astronauts, the first American astronaut to go twice into space. Edward White, 36 years old, the first American to walk in space. And rookie astronaut Roger Chaffee, 31 years old, training for his first space flight, Apollo 1, scheduled for February 21st.
So, I mean, that's a bit weird. A couple of days after he gives a press conference saying that this thing is a lemon and it's not going to work, they decide to test a pure oxygen atmosphere with the doors fully bolted, and something causes a spark next to some oily rags under his seat. That's a bit weird, isn't it?
Yeah, but
I'll quickly run through this. The other really weird thing, and we know this from his wife, is that minutes after he died, a CIA team raided his house and took all of his documents and possessions and stuff. Like, presumably there just happened to be a CIA team just outside his house passing by, and they got it over the radio to go and do this, because his wife didn't even find out he was dead for another hour after that.
I mean, it was like their national security guys at that point, isn't it? Like,
yeah, and it's lucky they had a CIA team outside his house to get there in a couple of minutes.
Again, you measure it. The Apollo 1 disaster weighted against all the LRO images of the Apollo landing sites. It's just, it doesn't really mean anything.
Maybe.
Well, not that it doesn't mean anything,
maybe.
but it's just, when you weigh the evidence against each other, it's just, the Apollo 1 disaster happened.
Yeah, but I mean, it could possibly be because you're more familiar with that side of the argument, and there's quite a lot more. I mean, I just mentioned three more men before, because we were really running out of time. Is Thomas Barron was a safety inspector on the program. And he put out two reports, a 170-page report and a 270-page report, basically saying the same thing, that this thing is not going to work. We're at least 10 years away. And this got the attention of Congress, and they said, right, we want you to come and speak to us. Before he could deliver that testimony, curious thing happened. He passed out as his car was driving over a railway track, and he got killed.
Right. Funny
that. Two guys who say that this isn't going to work sort of died mysteriously. So, maybe the deep state is just incredibly lucky. I don't know what's going on there. Another example, Elon Musk. So, of course, he's looking to put, people on the moon. And it's been interesting watching SpaceX's work going on this. And he's been saying that you need at least 8 supply drops to set this up before you can do this mission, which is, funnily enough, pretty much the same thing as the early NASA scientists were saying at the beginning of this project, until they changed their tune and said, we can do it in one hit, which is interesting. And when you ask Elon Musk about this, he just goes a bit defensive and says it was a historical anomaly, but won't elaborate any further. So that's really interesting. The final thing that I mention is Neil Armstrong himself, because, of course, he became a total recluse after this, didn't he?
Near recluse,
yeah,
not a total recluse. But...
And he said that he would only ever give press conferences if his president asked him to. And he was asked to speak at the 25-year anniversary of the landings. And I
think he was just quite a shy person, because like Buzz Aldrin, for example, would endlessly talk to anyone.
This is interesting. What did he mean by this?
Today we have with us a group of students among America's best. To you we say, we have only completed a beginning. We leave you much that is undone. There are great ideas undiscovered, breakthroughs available to those who can remove one of truth's protective layers.
So I don't know what he meant by removing truth's protective layers.
Yeah, it's really enigmatic, and so I just...
Why does the truth have a protective layer around it, and why does he feel the need to be so cryptic about this?
It's weird. Yeah. It's weird.
Yeah.
But there's the LRO images.
Provided by NASA.
Like the LRO,
yeah.
And other space agencies have got...
Well, one other now.
Versus what Neil Armstrong said that one time.
Well... Yeah, but it's more than that, isn't it? And I've scratched the surface. So I can tell that you're 100%.
No. I haven't been to the moon.
Yeah.
So I'm not.
So you're at 99% then. I'm just saying. Yeah. I'm just saying.
The preponderance of evidence.
The more you look at it, and I can only present so much, but the more I look at it, the more I'm like 50-50. And I would love to get back to 100%. I want to get there. So if I can have all of my questions answered, I'd be perfectly happy with that. And all I'm saying to people is, I'm not asking you to just start waving around saying, oh yeah, it's definitely fake. All I'm saying is that there are genuine questions here, and it's just weird why they don't get addressed and they don't get answered, and why AI tools are saying that the footage is fake and why the footage was destroyed.
AI thing's interesting.
There's some really weird stuff about it. So I'm just saying, don't be at 100%. Just have an element of doubt in your mind.
Yeah, no, there is an element of doubt in my mind, especially around the early ones. I'll just say the footage with all its problems inherent, the reflectors with all those problems inherent, the LRO stuff, and the hundreds of pounds of moon rocks.
Which you can get from Antarctica, the reason I wanted to do this segment with you two is because you two are the biggest skeptics in the office by far on this particular subject. So where do you come on this, Callum? You've been quiet.
I'm bored.
You don't think it's even worth addressing there?
Not really. I hate the subject because you can always tell when a conspiracy theory is bullshit when you jump from thing to thing to thing constantly, and pretty much nothing you said wasn't having something wrong with it. I mean, at one point you mentioned that the Russians tell their own people that the moon landings didn't happen, but also they're operating it now. It's just annoying. That's my opinion.
Fair enough.
If you appreciated that episode from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Brokenomics series, this episode on podcasting with Carl. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Twitter at lotuseaters_com on Twitter. Thank you and goodbye.